Monsterverse Godzilla may be the single most divisive Godzilla we've had in a long time, but the most controversial has somewhat always been Zilla. And I am not going to be shy about saying I've got a soft spot for the big iguana. Something that probably has to deal with the fact that I watched this movie so many times at my grandmother's cottage, I've probably developed borderline Stockholm Syndrome for it. There really wasn't a whole lot to do up there other than, since this was before Wi-Fi ever existed and we never had internet up there, there really wasn't much to do other than burn stuff in the fire pit, find stuff to burn, go hiking, so touch grass, shoot pizza boxes with the BB gun, or play cards. And it wasn't even like this was the only movie we had on VHS tapes up there. For those of you too young to know what a VHS tape is, imagine a DVR, except instead of everything being stored digitally, they're all stored on these big black bricks. We had a few other Godzilla movies to watch, which my dad recorded for me on the VHS tapes. GMK, Godzilla vs. the Smog Monster, Godzilla vs. Megalon, and a few episodes of Godzilla the series, like 10 or so. Wasn't that many, and even a few of them were incomplete. Beyond that, there's Alien Resurrection, Predator 2, and a couple of the Pokemon movies, which we actually had on the actual official VHS tapes. It was not fun fast forwarding through the commercials on some of those. We watched that movie so much, we actually burned the Godzilla 98 tape out. So, yeah, by no stretch of the imagination, this is probably my most watched Godzilla movie, and I do have a bit of a soft spot for it, as flawed as it is. Hello everyone, I'm your American Allosaurus, Max Allo, and if you haven't done so already, don't forget to comment your thoughts below on Zilla, subscribe for more, leave a like, and I do want to thank you guys. This wasn't exactly the kind of video I was planning on making this week. Actually, in fact, it was supposed to be a video on Yu-Gi-Oh! But there were some personal events that unfolded, and I got thinking that this was kind of the video I wanted to make this week. I'm at grandmother's cottage I used to watch this movie at. Grammy Sora is sadly no longer with us. And a lot of my fondest memories were of watching a lot of those movies up at that cottage with her. Well, up at Grandma's cottage. So, before we get on with everything else, just don't forget to spend a little time with your family. You never know how long you got with them. It may not be a lot of time now, but those memories will last forever. I thought about taking the week off, but much like when Mia passed away, the friend of mine that helped out the first channel, I just white-knuckle through the pain. Is it the healthiest thing to do?
Absolutely not!
But that is the only thing I know, so it's what we're doing. I'm probably gonna make a much more comprehensive video on Zilla when, my head's in a better place, but it's a movie that I very strongly associate with, my family because just how much we watched up at that cottage. The movie definitely has its flaws, and I'm not gonna sugarcoat how there's a lot of things about it I'm not a big fan of, just as much as I'll say that I actually think it's a lot better than credit is given to. This is gonna be a bit about the actual character itself and the movie, and to a lesser degree about Godzilla the series. I almost look at it in kind of the opposite way that I actually look at Godzilla -1, where -1 is a fantastically written movie with very few flaws, but there are flaws nonetheless. When it comes to Godzilla 98, Zilla, the movie is basically kind of a massive train wreck. There's a lot of things wrong with it, namely its depiction of Godzilla, but there are a few little hidden gems in there that I think it actually did very well as. Even actually outdoing a few of the things about the original Godzilla that, because I actually saw the original Godzilla after seeing this movie, I think that 98 actually did better at. The biggest one actually being like the tragedy of Godzilla. We never really get to see this in the actual movie of 54, which to this day is kind of one of my biggest criticisms of that movie, where Godzilla is meant to be a tragic and sympathetic character. 98, we actually get that being able to see the tragedy happen, being the destruction of its nest and its young, which is when it goes on the warpath against humanity. Now that happens at the end of the movie, but we still get to see it nonetheless. Well, something similar did happen to the original Godzilla, we never get to see it. It was only in the theater program. The weird thing is, it's called America's Godzilla in a somewhat derisive manner, but I almost feel like if it was called anything other than Godzilla, like Gigaguana or Dinosaur or something like that, because, I mean, it was clearly made to try to ape a little bit of the positive will towards Jurassic Park rather than Godzilla, I feel like it would be somewhat remembered, not as a great movie, but as like, you know, America's version of its first kaiju film. You know, I mean, King Kong, yeah, I mean, King Kong kind of, original King Kong is kind of in a bit of a weird place of like kaiju, not kaiju, because it is just, you know, it's about like 20 feet tall. It's not super huge, but, you know, kind of does fit in there. Whereas this is much more like what we think of a kaiju. You know, I think it would be, I think to a degree it would still like be referred to as America's Godzilla if it went by an entirely different name, but in a much more, I guess like much less derisive context. Because people say the same thing about Cloverfield. They refer to Cloverfield as America's Godzilla. Which that might actually be another video we do at some point. We saw Cloverfield with that. Maybe we do that someday. One thing actually about the movie I actually really appreciate is with the personality of Zilla, is it's not a monster, you know, and it's not, you know, going around basically mindlessly destroying buildings and, you know, just rampaging. It acts like an animal and has more animalistic instincts, and it's not really aggressive towards humanity until when we attack it and when we blow up its nest. It primarily just runs away, which, obviously, that's one of the other issues of it, is that it's not Godzilla's invulnerability. It does not have the vast majority of Godzilla's traditional characteristics. It doesn't have the nigh invulnerability in impervious to conventional weapons. It doesn't have the atomic breath. It's not even nearly as big as Godzilla. But for what it was, I actually kind of like the personality they gave it. It's a bit more skittish. It wants to run away, hide, because it doesn't want to get into conflict with humanity until we go after it in force. Namely, when they send the helicopters, it ambushes the helicopters and destroys them, and when it's just literally trying to eat some fish, it actually basically just avoids humanity just to go to the fish. It kind of gives it a little bit more personality out of it than we actually see from Godzilla in most of the Toho films. We did definitely get flashes of Godzilla's personality in, especially some of the later Heisei era films, but most of Heisei Godzilla's personality is the conglomeration of, you know, pretty much a decade and some change worth of movies. Not distilled down to a single movie, except for Godzilla vs. Godzilla 2, which I do still hold up as probably one of the best Godzilla movies for portraying Godzilla's personality, which, probably video on that at some point. But for being a single movie, having to set up Godzilla's origin in terms of in film, I think it actually did a pretty good job of that. The movie is also definitely a little bloated. I mean, in fact, I actually think it is still the longest Godzilla movie in the series. So there definitely could have been some fat trimming out, mostly involving the human characters. Now, I know this is probably something that is going to make some people want to put my head on a silver platter. I actually don't hate the design. I actually think the design is, dare I say, quite good. Yes, it is a very drastic departure from classical Godzilla. To put into context, at the time that I saw this movie, the only Godzillas I was familiar with were Meyer Goji, Magaro Goji, GMK Goji, and the Godzilla from Godzilla vs. Hedorah. I was used to seeing Godzilla have radically different designs and shapes, so seeing giant T-Rex iguana monster really didn't feel like that big of a stretch to me. I just saw it as another different Godzilla. In fact, a few of the little design quirks of it are part of the reason I actually like some of the design choices of MonsterVerse Godzilla. I like the much more hunched appearance, the sort of more boxy, I guess, head, and sort of distinct lack of a neck. I will say, I do think Zilla is more than a little too skinny. One of the big mistakes of the movie was definitely trying to out Jurassic Park rather than staying true to what Godzilla was. The one thing I really can't offer any complaints about is actually the dorsal spines. I really love the curved forward shape. And, of course, to a much younger me, seeing a Godzilla movie, again, one of the only ones that I had at the time, with a main character, Dr. Nectitopoulos, who was just a character fascinated with and wanting to study and understand Godzilla, was something that just appealed to me, someone who loved Godzilla. Even as I went further on into discovering more and more about the series, it kind of just made that thing resonate more and more and more. A person fascinated with Godzilla and wanting to study him more. It's no surprise that when I started writing my own kaiju stories, the basic premise of a scientist with a fanatic want to understand monsters is the basis of the first story idea I came up with. Now, yes, this was back in 2010, and as I discovered more and more about the Heisei era, it later did draw far more heavily on the Heisei era Godzilla films. My first deep dive down that rabbit hole actually being the Godzilla vs. Space Godzilla, Godzilla vs. Destroya dual-sided DVD, which was a birthday gift from that same grandmother. Even when it came to designing the hero kaiju of my stories, a few different dorsal plate ideas I came up with were something like a Spinosaurus's dorsal sail, to a Stegosaurus's dorsal plates, or backwards facing curved saw blade like spines like Zilla. And Zilla's were the ones that stuck. Again, I'm not gonna sit here and say, this is the greatest Godzilla movie, or this is one of the best Godzilla movies, because while it did actually kick Toho into high gear and get them to make the Millennium era, which they were not going to be making to clear the way for America to make its Godzilla trilogy, after 98 absolutely flopped, they got back to making stuff, and they made Godzilla 2000, the first Godzilla movie I ever saw. And in a lot of ways, I do think that this movie needed to essentially die for MonsterVerse to succeed. I'm not going to say that that makes this movie any better, because it does have a lot of flaws. That's the thing people say about the original Pokemon games, and it's one of the things I hate about that is the original thing itself was flawed. Just because it led to things better down the road doesn't change the inherent failings of the original product. I'll also say that after I saw Godzilla 54 for the first time and saw at the end of it that Godzilla died, it kind of made me like the ending of 98 a bit more, seeing as, well, a younger me thought, oh, that actually makes a lot of sense. Godzilla died in the original, and Godzilla dies in this one. It's in vastly different ways, and now I can look on it and be a lot more critical of it. The much younger me really didn't mind, and even today, I still don't mind as much. It is worth noting that today, I don't really watch this movie. Call it burnout, call it whatever you may, I can still appreciate the movie for what it is. The good and the bad. Again, at some point I probably plan to make a more full-out, more comprehensive video on it, because I know I'm not really in the right mind to be working on any big, giant, complex things right now. I want to thank you guys for watching. Usual sub, comment thing here. I'm not going to try and fancy it up. The most important thing is just, spend time with your family. Friends, anyone you know. You never really know how long you have with them, and, even if it's something like just watching a movie together, just being in the same room as them, letting them know you're there, it means a lot more to them than you realize. Those memories may only take a short time to make, but they'll last forever. I've been Max Allo, and I'll see you next time.